A scream in the dark garage, four men closing in. No one expected the janitor, the single dad, to be the one who saved her. Stay with me, and if this pulls you in, drop a comment and hit subscribe. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the underground garage of Hale Tower, a place that usually carried only the sound of engines starting or heels clicking across polished concrete. But that night, the quiet was broken by something raw and jagged. A scream. "Help! Please! Someone help!" The words cut through the stillness, sharp and terrified, bouncing off the concrete walls. Adrian Park froze in mid-step, the strap of his worn backpack digging into his shoulder. His shift was nearly over, and he had been heading for the service stairwell, ready to climb back to the simple life he had built. A small apartment and the warm light of his 7-year-old daughter waiting for him. But the sound of that scream rooted him to the spot. His heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that kind of desperation. It wasn't just fear, it was a fight for survival. From behind the thick concrete pillar, he leaned just far enough to see. What unfolded in the CEO's reserved parking stall felt unreal. Two of Hale Industries' seasoned bodyguards already lay motionless on the ground. Four men in black ski masks had surrounded a woman with blonde hair disheveled from a struggle, her back pressed against the sleek silver sedan. He recognized her instantly. Victoria Hale, the youngest CEO in the company's history, a face usually marked by poise and authority, now pale with terror as one of the masked men clamped a hand around her arm, dragging her toward a black van with its sliding door open wide like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. "Get in quietly," the man growled, his voice low, threatening, practiced. Adrian's breath hitched. Every rational thought screamed at him to run. He was just a janitor, the man who scrubbed marble floors and emptied bins no one noticed. He had sworn to bury the other part of himself, the martial artist, the fighter, the man whose hands had once been weapons. He had buried it with his wife, Anna, when cancer took her away. Since then, he had lived only for Lena, his daughter, promising her the gift of a quiet, safe life. No more violence, no more risk. But then Victoria screamed again, a sound that didn't beg. It demanded that someone step out of the shadows, demanded that someone act. And in that instant, Adrian felt the walls he had built around himself crack. The promise he had clung to was no longer something he could afford. He exhaled slowly. The janitor faded, and the fighter he had locked away stirred awake. He let the backpack slide silently to the floor, his shoes moving across the concrete with the grace of muscle memory, his heartbeat steadying into something fierce and focused. Adrian Park stepped from behind the pillar, not as the invisible man with a mop and cart, but as a warrior called back into the light. The men had no idea that their ambush was about to change everything. The man gripping Victoria's arm never saw him coming. One moment he was yanking her toward the van, the next, a sharp crack split the air. Adrian's palm slammed against the attacker's elbow joint with ruthless precision. The bone hyperextended with a sickening pop. The man dropped to his knees, his arm hanging uselessly at his side as a howl of pain echoed through the garage. Before the others could react, Adrian was already moving, a blur of controlled violence in the dim light. The second masked man spun with a wrench raised high, swinging it in a deadly arc toward Adrian's head. But Adrian didn't flinch. He slid inside the strike, his forearm catching the man's wrist, his elbow snapping upward. The blow connected with the man's chin. His body went limp, collapsing to the ground as if someone had cut his strings. 2 down. Victoria pressed herself against the cold steel of her car, eyes wide in disbelief. She had never seen anyone move like that, silent, efficient, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The remaining 2 surged at Adrian together, fists flying in wild, brutal arcs meant to overwhelm. They expected panic, chaos, retreat. Instead, Adrian became something else, calm, fluid, unshakable. He sidestepped a haymaker, his hand snapping out to seize the attacker's wrist, pulling him off balance just as the other lunged forward. The 2 collided in a clumsy heap. Before they could recover, Adrian struck with precision. His heel whipped into the side of one man's knee. There was a sharp snap as the joint gave way. A spinning back fist followed instantly, connecting with the temple of the last man. Both crumpled onto the concrete in a groaning tangle of limbs. And then, silence. 10 seconds. That was all it had taken. Four men who had stormed in with brute confidence now lay broken and groaning on the garage floor. The hum of the fluorescent lights returned, filling the space with a strange, sterile calm. Adrian stood over them only for a breath, his chest rising and falling in controlled rhythm. He wasn't looking for victory, only survival, only to ensure that the woman pressed against the sedan was still breathing. His eyes flicked toward her. Victoria's gaze locked on him, stunned, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked at him, not as the janitor she passed in the lobby, but as something she couldn't yet name. A ghost, a shadow, a savior who had stepped out of nowhere. And just as quickly, he was gone. Adrian turned on his heel, retreating into the maze of concrete pillars, his footsteps swallowed by the garage. No words, no explanation. The warrior's calm dissolved into the panic of a man who knew he had revealed too much. He vanished back into the shadows, leaving behind four defeated assailants, two unconscious bodyguards, and a CEO who would never look at a janitor the same way again. When Victoria blinked, he was already gone. It was as though he had never been there at all, except for the wreckage of men on the ground and the lingering echo of his presence, like the memory of a storm that had passed too quickly to comprehend. The garage filled quickly with flashing lights. Sirens echoed off the walls as police and Hale Industries security teams stormed the scene. Victoria stood still against her car, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Four masked men groaned on the ground. Her two bodyguards lay dazed but alive, and the one person who had truly saved her had vanished as if the night itself had swallowed him. Questions came at her all at once. Who were they? How had they slipped inside? Had she seen their faces? But Victoria's mind was elsewhere. She replayed those impossible seconds in her head, the way he had moved, the way he had fought, not like a desperate man, not like a thug swinging wildly. He had moved with precision, efficiency, as if every strike had been measured to end the fight before it began. That wasn't instinct, that was training. Mason, pull the footage, she ordered sharply, cutting through the chaos. Her head of security, still rattled by the embarrassment of two fallen guards, hesitated. Ma'am, the cameras in P1 aren't ideal. Angles are obstructed. She didn't let him finish. Show me now. Minutes later, in her corner office high above the city, Victoria stared at grainy black and white footage flickering across her monitor. The pillar blocked much of the view, just as Mason had warned. But then there, a figure slipping into frame. The uniform was unmistakable. A janitor's gray shirt. The face was blurred, shadowed, caught only for a fraction of a second as he knelt beside her before disappearing again. But it was enough. Her gut told her the truth. Find him, she said quietly, eyes narrowing. I want his name, his file, everything. By midnight, a manila folder landed on her desk. Mason dropped it with reluctance, his pride still stung. Victoria opened it with steady hands. Inside, a single photo stared back at her. A standard employee ID shot. Adrian Park, age 36, employed with Hale Industries' contracted cleaning service for nearly 2 years. But beneath the surface details, a line of fine print caught her eye. Previous employment, self-employed. She frowned. That was vague, too vague. She picked up her phone. Run a full background check, she instructed. No delays, no excuses. I don't care what it costs. Hours later, the results came back, and with every page she scrolled through, the shape of the man who had saved her came into focus. Former owner and head instructor of the Way of the Open Hand Martial Arts Academy, a black belt of national standing, a trainer for local law enforcement. There were photos, Adrian, younger, smiling, his waist wrapped with the dark belt of discipline and mastery. Then came the tragedy. His wife, Anna Park, diagnosed with a rare and aggressive cancer. The academy sold, the savings drained, the bills piling higher than hope. 2 years later, she was gone. And Adrian Park, once a sensei, once a leader, had vanished into the quiet anonymity of mops and buckets. A man who had chosen invisibility for the sake of his daughter, Lena. Victoria closed the file slowly, her mind spinning. He hadn't saved her for money or recognition. He had stepped out of the shadows because he couldn't ignore a cry for help. He was hiding, yes, but not from the law, from life. And she realized with a chill that the only person who had succeeded in protecting her tonight was the one man her entire company overlooked. The janitor, the ghost in the hallways, Adrian Park. The night after the ambush bled into morning without rest for Adrian Park. He sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the smell of toasted bread and turkey slices filling the air as he prepared Lena's lunch for school. His hands moved automatically, cutting the sandwich into the star shape she loved, but his mind was anything but steady. Every detail of the fight in the garage replayed behind his eyes. Every strike, every sound of breaking bone, every glimpse of the CEO's wide, disbelieving gaze. He had stepped out of the shadows, and there was no undoing it. The knock came, firm, deliberate, not the tentative tap of a neighbor. Adrian's head snapped up, his chest tightened. "Daddy, someone's at the door," Lena called from the living room, her little voice wrapped in Saturday morning cartoons. "I know, sweetheart. Stay right there," he answered, forcing calm into his tone. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, his heart pounding like a drum as he moved down the narrow hall, peering through the peephole. His breath caught. Victoria Hale. She looked impossibly out of place in the drab hallway, her tailored suit sharp against peeling paint and worn linoleum. The silver Aston Martin at the curb outside gleamed like it belonged to another world, and it did. She was that world. Adrian opened the door halfway, instinctively blocking the entrance with his frame. "Miss Hale," he said quietly, his voice guarded. "Mr. Park," she replied, her voice calm, clipped, carrying none of the terror he'd heard in it hours earlier. "May I come in?" It wasn't a question. Adrian hesitated, then stepped aside. She moved into the small apartment, her heels soundless on the faded rug, her sharp eyes sweeping the room, the cartoons on the old TV, the crayon drawings taped to the wall, the quiet signs of a life built carefully, brick by brick, to keep one little girl safe. "I came to thank you," Victoria began, turning to face him, "and to offer you something. Last night proved that my security is compromised. My men were down in seconds. You weren't. I want you as my new head of security." Adrian shook his head immediately, the words tumbling out almost before she had finished. "No, that life is over for me. I'm just trying to raise my daughter, keep her safe, that's all." Her eyes narrowed, studying him as though he were another puzzle to solve. "Do you really think safety is still an option, Mr. Park? The men who came for me weren't amateurs. They'll be asking questions. They'll want to know who ruined their plan. Right now, you are the loose end they can't afford to ignore." Adrian's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on refusing her world that he hadn't considered how it might already have bled into his own. His refusal wasn't protection, it was an illusion. Victoria's voice softened, but her words cut sharply. "You can say no to me, but you can't say no to them. They will find you. And when they do, they won't stop at your door. They'll find Lena too." The name of his daughter on her lips made the room tilt. Adrian looked past her to the living room, where Lena's laughter rose from the cartoons, innocent, untroubled. His throat tightened. He had spent years building this fragile sanctuary for her, a life without chaos or fear, and now it was already crumbling. He met Victoria's gaze, his own filled with the weight of inevitability. She didn't flinch. She had forced the truth into the open, and he could no longer look away. Adrian let out a long, heavy breath. The fight he thought he had buried was calling him back. For Lena. For her safety. "All right," he said at last, the words tasting like surrender and resolve at once. "I'll do it." The decision was made. There was no going back. By afternoon, Adrian Park found himself walking behind Victoria through the sleek corridors of Hale Tower, not with a mopping cart this time, but with a new weight on his shoulders. She led him to the lower sub-level, the nerve center of the company's private security, the so-called command deck, a room alive with screens, comms, and the quiet hum of machines. Mason Burke was already there, his posture stiff, his jaw tight with resentment. To him, Adrian was still just a janitor wearing the wrong clothes. "Show me the footage from last night," Adrian said calmly, stepping closer to the console. Mason scoffed, but at Victoria's nod, one of the younger guards pulled it up. The screens lit with 4 angles of the ambush in the garage, every chaotic second replaying in slow motion. Adrian didn't watch himself. He studied the bodyguards. He leaned in, pointing at the feed. There, 10 seconds before the attack. Both men tapped their earpieces, almost in unison. That wasn't nervous habit. Their comms were jammed. Whoever did this knew your protocols. They disabled your communication before they struck. The room grew quiet. Mason's smirk faltered. Adrian shifted to another feed, the grainy shot of the black van tearing out of the garage. Commercial model, untraceable, but he gestured for the guard to zoom in on the rear window. There. See that? A decal, small, a bird of prey, a hawk maybe. It's not standard issue. That's a marker. People who plan this carefully leave fingerprints. This is one of them. Victoria's eyes flicked to Mason, sharp with silent judgment. Mason shifted uncomfortably, unable to deny what Adrian had spotted in seconds. Just then, a guard announced a delivery had cleared through reception for Ms. Hale. Orchid and Vine Atelier, a rare orchid. The timing made Adrian's instincts bristle. He excused himself and took the elegant box into a conference room. Alone, he set the flower on the polished table. It was beautiful, deep purple petals, flawless, almost regal. But beauty was often the best disguise. Adrian ran his fingers slowly along the ceramic pot, pressing gently, feeling for anything that didn't belong. His hand slipped into the soil, turning the earth until it brushed something hard and unnatural. He dug carefully, and there it was, a device no larger than a grain of rice, a listening bug, its tiny microphone glinting faintly under the light. His stomach sank. He placed the bug in his palm, staring at it in silence. Whoever was after Victoria hadn't just tried to take her body. They wanted her secrets, her thoughts, her strategies. The enemy wasn't outside the gates anymore. They were already in the castle. Adrian walked into Victoria's office without knocking. She looked up from her desk mid-call and froze at the expression on his face. He opened his hand and let the small black device rest there like proof of betrayal. "They're listening," he said quietly. "They're already here." Victoria's face drained of color. For the first time since the garage, her composure slipped. Around them, the hum of the tower suddenly felt different. No longer a sound of control, but of intrusion. And in that moment, Adrian knew his job wasn't just to guard her life. It was to protect the heart of an empire already under siege. Victoria stared at the tiny listening device in Adrian's palm, her jaw tight with fury. The walls of Hale Tower suddenly felt thinner, as if every shadow hid another ear. She reached for a pen, sliding a leather-bound notepad across the desk. They could be listening now. Adrian understood without a word. He nodded, wrote a single line in neat, firm script. "We need a sweep, someone I trust." That night, after the last executives had gone home and the glass tower had quieted, a young man entered the lobby carrying a rolling case of equipment. To the casual eye, he looked like any third-party IT consultant, badge clipped to his jacket, hair dyed jet black with a rebellious edge. But Adrian knew better. Miles Chen, once a restless teenager with a talent for hacking, now one of the most respected technical counter-surveillance experts in the city. Adrian had trained him years ago, showing him how discipline could sharpen brilliance into purpose. And when Adrian called, Miles had answered with no hesitation. "It's been a while, Sensei," Miles said softly as Adrian ushered him into Victoria's office. "Too long," Adrian replied, though his eyes were already scanning the room. "I wish it were under better circumstances." Miles set to work in silence, his instruments humming as he swept frequencies, his handheld scanner glowing with spikes of hidden signals. He moved like a ghost, methodical, checking every lamp, every frame, every seam. Within minutes, the truth began to surface. "There's one here," Miles murmured, peeling back the velvet lining of a desk lamp to reveal a pinhole device no larger than a fingernail. He sealed it in an evidence bag before moving on. At the back of a massive landscape painting, he found another taped in place, its tiny antenna disguised against the canvas, and then a third, even smaller, embedded inside the baseboard beneath the window. Victoria's hand tightened around her chair. 3 devices, all in the room where she made her most guarded decisions. Whoever planted them hadn't been amateurs. Miles examined one closely, his brows knitting. "This is military grade, not something you buy online. And look here, the power source, a micro battery, custom made. There are only a handful of manufacturers in the world who build these, and they don't sell to civilians." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "So who do they sell to?" "Private contractors," Miles said, sealing the device. the kind with deep pockets and darker connections. Give me a few hours to trace the batch. We'll know who placed the order. Victoria leaned forward, her voice low, urgent. Do it, whatever it takes. By morning, Miles had his answer. He placed a thin dossier on Victoria's desk, the glow of the city lights behind him. Adrian opened it, scanning the pages. The micro batteries had been part of a bulk order purchased months earlier. The buyer, Sentinel Corps, a private security contractor. And Sentinel Corps wasn't independent. It was a subsidiary of a holding company controlled by Edward Blackwell. Victoria's expression hardened, the name like venom on her tongue. Blackwell, her rival on the board, the man who had fought against her appointment as CEO, who had smiled in meetings while quietly undermining her at every turn. Now the mask had slipped. Adrian closed the folder slowly, meeting her eyes. This wasn't random, he said, his voice steady, grim. The man who's supposed to stand beside you at the table is the one trying to take you off it. The room was silent except for the low hum of the machines and the faint city noise beyond the glass. And in that silence, a new truth settled between them. The enemy wasn't out there. He was already inside. The revelation of Edward Blackwell's hand in the conspiracy left no doubt, but Adrian knew suspicion alone wouldn't hold in a boardroom, let alone in court. Men like Blackwell survived on layers of deniability. To bring him down, they would need more than whispers. They would need him to reveal himself. And so, they began to weave a trap. In the days that followed, Hale Tower hummed with carefully planted rumors. Victoria stood before her board and with radiant confidence announced that Hale Industries was in the final stages of acquiring Cascade Robotics, a Seattle-based titan of next-generation automation. It was the kind of deal that would secure her reign for decades, a move so bold that every rival would scramble to react. But this deal existed only as bait. Adrian played his part with quiet precision. In the security hub, he staged conversations loud enough for listening ears, arguments with Mason about weak points in the Seattle itinerary, complaints about understaffed details and hotel security that sounded almost careless. He made sure the flaws in her upcoming trip were too obvious for an ambitious predator to resist. Blackwell would believe he had been handed another opportunity on a silver platter. Miles, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to prepare the stage on the outskirts of Portland. He secured a foreclosed warehouse, its cavernous interior perfect for the play they intended to stage. Under the cover of night, he rigged it with hidden cameras and floodlights, the ceiling lined with motion-triggered systems. He set up a command center inside a disguised van parked nearby, servers humming, screens glowing with the cold light of readiness. Every angle of the warehouse could be watched, recorded, and transmitted in real time. And then came the final touch, the stand-in. A woman with blonde hair, chosen carefully, trained to mimic Victoria's posture, her voice, even the way she held tension in her jaw. She wore the same tailored suit, the same heels. From a distance, in the chaos of flashing lights and shouted orders, she would be indistinguishable from the CEO. She was the decoy who would walk into the trap so that the real Victoria could watch her enemies expose themselves. On the night of the supposed Seattle trip, the choreography began. A black SUV, identical to Victoria's usual transport, rolled out of Hale Tower, its tinted windows hiding the body double surrounded by a skeleton security team. Adrian's team made sure the convoy moved along routes that seemed routine, predictable, just as Blackwell's spies would hope. Victoria and Adrian sat shoulder to shoulder in the dark of Miles's command van, the glow of monitors painting their faces. On one screen, the decoy SUV crossed a bridge toward the industrial district. On another, a black sedan followed at a distance, the same car tied to Sentinel Corps. Adrian's jaw tightened. The bait had been taken. "They'll strike on the access road," Adrian murmured, eyes fixed on the feed. "It's isolated. No witnesses. Exactly where I'd hit." Victoria's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice was steady. "Then let them come." The SUV slowed as two black vans boxed it in. Armed men spilled out, swarming the vehicle, yanking open the doors. The decoy screamed on cue, struggling just enough to sell the illusion. Within seconds, they dragged her into the van. The convoy peeled away, tires screeching into the night, heading straight for the warehouse where their downfall waited. In the van, Adrian watched every second, his face unreadable. Victoria glanced at him, searching for doubt, but found only a calm born of experience. He had become the ghost again, not hiding this time, but hunting. And in that moment, as the enemy rushed headlong into their carefully laid snare, Victoria realized something profound. For all the wealth, all the power, all the bodyguards she could buy, it was this man, the janitor she had once overlooked, who had become the shield between her world and ruin. The convoy tore through the empty streets, two black vans boxing in the SUV until it had no choice but to stop. Armed men in tactical gear swarmed forward, their movements crisp and confident. In seconds, the door was yanked open, and the woman inside, the body double, was dragged out, kicking and shouting. To their eyes, it was Victoria Hale herself. They bound her wrists, shoved a hood over her head, and loaded her into the van. Their leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek, barked into a phone. "We have her. No complications." His voice carried the satisfaction of a predator, certain of his kill. They drove her to the warehouse on the outskirts of the city, headlights slicing through the dark until the hulking structure loomed before them. The vans rolled inside, engines echoing in the cavernous space. The men hauled their prize out, pulling the hood from her head. For a split second, they expected fear to reign in her eyes, but instead they caught a flicker of defiance. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Something felt wrong. And then the lights came. Floodlights roared to life, blinding white brilliance flooding the warehouse. Shadows vanished in an instant, every corner illuminated as if the night itself had been banished. The armed men staggered, raising hands to shield their eyes. And from the glare stepped Adrian Park, calm and steady, flanked by a small, disciplined team he trusted with his life. "You were expecting someone else," his voice carried across the warehouse, cool and controlled, slicing through the chaos. The scarred leader snarled, rallying his men. "It's a trap! Take them!" He raised his weapon, but before the first shot could ring out, the darkness returned. Two flashbangs detonated overhead with deafening cracks, blasts of light and sound disorienting half the squad. Then silence. The floodlights cut out, plunging the space into pitch black. Muzzle flashes flared desperately in the dark, shots wild and frantic. But Adrian's team moved like ghosts, their night vision goggles painting the scene in green clarity. They owned the shadows now. Adrian slipped between crates, his footsteps silent. One by one, his operators neutralized the intruders with precision, disarming, striking, zip-tying wrists. Limbs were targeted, not lives. This was about proof, not blood. The cries of stunned mercenaries echoed, the sound of predators realizing too late that they had become prey. At the center of it all, Adrian closed in on the scarred leader. The man lunged with a knife, relying on brute strength and rage. Adrian's body moved in practiced rhythm, redirecting the slash, twisting the man's arm behind his back, a sharp kick sending him crashing to the floor. The blade clattered across concrete. With a swift lock, Adrian forced him down, his shoulders screaming in pain under the hold. "It's over," Adrian said quietly, his breath steady, as if the fight had barely touched him. The floodlights blazed on again, revealing the truth. 10 men from Sentinel Corps lay restrained, groaning, their weapons scattered uselessly across the ground. The body double, unharmed, stood calmly to one side, and every second of it, all the chaos, all the evidence, had been captured by hidden cameras that lined the warehouse walls. The hunters had been caught in their own snare. And as Adrian's team secured the last of the mercenaries, he lifted his head toward the yawning warehouse doors. He knew who was coming next, the real enemy, the man who thought he had orchestrated her downfall. Edward Blackwell's moment of reckoning was about to arrive. The roar of an expensive engine cut through the still night, growing louder until a sleek black Mercedes rolled into the warehouse. Its headlights sliced across the concrete floor, sweeping over the restrained men of Sentinel Corps, sprawled in defeat. The car door opened, and Edward Blackwell stepped out, his suit immaculate, his smile smug with anticipation. He expected to see Victoria Hale bound and broken, delivered neatly into his hands, but the sight that greeted him froze the smile on his face. His elite mercenaries were zip-tied on the floor, weapons scattered uselessly, and standing tall among them was Adrian Park, calm, watchful, a silent shadow made flesh. Blackwell's confident stride faltered. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking at the edges. From behind the glow of the command van, Victoria emerged. No fear, no chains, only authority, sharp as steel. Her heels clicked slowly across the concrete, each step echoing like a gavel. "Surprised to see me, Edward?" He tried to recover, adjusting his cufflinks with forced composure. "I got a call about a breach. I came to help." His words were smooth, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Save the performance," Victoria cut him off. She gave Adrian a subtle nod. Adrian hauled the scarred leader of Sentinel Corps to his feet, shoving him forward. The man's face was pale with defeat, his voice bitter but resolute. "He hired us. Blackwell paid us to take her, bug her office, all of it. The plan was to make her disappear, then force the board to remove her." Blackwell's mask shattered. "He's lying," he snapped. "This is a setup. You can't prove." Victoria raised a hand, silencing him. Her gaze turned to the far wall where a discreet camera blinked red. "Actually, Edward, I can. Say hello to the board of directors." Above them, a screen flickered to life. In a secure conference room miles away, the entire Hale Industries board watched in stunned silence as the confession replayed live. Every word, every detail, captured and transmitted. Victoria's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of final judgment. "Members of the board, you have witnessed tonight's events with your own eyes. Edward Blackwell conspired to abduct me, to infiltrate our security, and to seize power by force. This is not ambition. This is treason." Blackwell's face drained of color. He turned, desperate to retreat to the safety of his car, but Adrian's men were already there, blocking his path. The warehouse echoed with the distant wail of sirens growing closer. "As of this moment," Victoria declared, her voice ringing like a verdict, "Edward Blackwell is removed from the board of Hale Industries for gross misconduct and criminal conspiracy." Her eyes locked on him, cold and merciless. "You will spend the rest of your life paying for the damage you've tried to cause." The sirens burst into the night outside as police vehicles swarmed the warehouse. Uniformed officers poured in, their red and blue lights painting the walls in jagged color. Blackwell's protest dissolved into a panicked murmur as handcuffs closed around his wrists. The scarred leader and his mercenaries were dragged away in chains, their empire of shadows collapsing in one night. For the first time in weeks, the air inside Hale Tower's orbit felt lighter. The threat was unmasked, the poison had been cut out, and standing there in the aftermath of the storm, Victoria and Adrian exchanged a glance that said more than words could. She had trusted him with her life, and he had delivered her enemies into the light. In the weeks that followed Blackwell's arrest, Hale Tower transformed. What had once been a fortress riddled with cracks became something stronger, rebuilt under Adrian Park's steady hand. He moved through the security hub with quiet authority, dismantling old systems of complacency and replacing them with discipline, clarity, and trust. The guards who had once smirked at him now stood straighter in his presence, their respect earned not by title, but by proof. Those who had courage and skill were lifted higher. Those who clung to pride alone, like Mason Burke, found themselves stepping aside. The command of Hale Industries' global security was no longer a hollow post. It was a living shield, and Adrian carried it as though it had always been his. Miles Chen was brought in officially, his restless brilliance now channeled into building a digital fortress around the company. Servers were hardened, networks fortified, every channel swept for the whispers of betrayal. Where once there had been hidden microphones and silent invaders, there was now vigilance. For Adrian, it was more than rebuilding a system. It was reclaiming the promise of safety, not just for Victoria, but for Lena too. But the changes didn't stop at protocols and cameras. Slowly, something shifted between the CEO and the man she had once known only as the janitor. Their meetings, at first focused on strategy, began to wander. A discussion about logistics would drift into late-night conversations about childhood memories, about grief, about the loneliness of carrying the weight of an empire or of raising a child alone. Somewhere between the quiet hours and the storm they had survived, the lines blurred. She was no longer simply his employer, and he was no longer just her shield. Lena felt it before either of them admitted it. The little girl ran into Victoria's arms as easily as she did her father's, her laughter spilling across the penthouse office or the quiet halls of their apartment. To Lena, there was no hierarchy, no titles, just warmth. She began to draw three figures in her crayon sketches, herself in the middle, Adrian on one side, Victoria on the other, stick hands linked beneath a sun drawn too big for the page. When Victoria saw those drawings taped to the refrigerator, her eyes softened in a way Adrian had never seen before. One evening, the three of them sat together at Mrs. Gable's kitchen table, the smell of fresh cookies in the air, Lena proudly showing Victoria her latest school project. It was such a simple moment, so ordinary, yet Adrian felt something deep inside settle into place. He realized he wasn't standing in the shadows anymore. He wasn't just the ghost who had stepped out of a pillar to fight. He was part of something he hadn't dared to imagine since Anna's passing, a home. For Victoria, the walls she had built through years of corporate battles began to fall, not with dramatic gestures, but with the quiet weight of trust. She had found strength not in isolation, but in letting someone else in. And for Adrian, who had buried his fists and his heart for the sake of survival, meaning had returned. He wasn't only a protector of a company, he was a father rediscovering joy, a man finding light where there had only been shadows. Together, with a CEO who had learned to lower her guard, a warrior who had found his purpose again, and a child whose love bridged their worlds, they had formed something rare. Not a contract, not a strategy, but a family. And in that discovery, all three of them stepped out of the darkness into a life that was, finally, beautifully safe. In the electrifying story of Adrian Park, a single dad and janitor who unleashes his hidden martial arts mastery to save CEO Victoria Hale from a deadly ambush, we discover a profound life lesson. Courage and trust can transform the humblest beginnings into unbreakable bonds, forging families from the ashes of adversity. Adrian, a former sensei who buried his warrior past to shield his daughter Lena from a life of violence, steps into the fray with breathtaking precision, proving that true heroism lies in acting for others despite personal cost. Victoria, a titan of industry betrayed by her own board, learns to see beyond titles, finding in Adrian not just a protector, but a partner who shares her burdens. Their meticulously planned trap to expose the treacherous Edward Blackwell reveals that strength isn't in wealth or power, but in the quiet resolve to protect what matters most. Lena's crayon drawings, uniting them under a too big sun, capture the heart of their journey, a family built not on contracts, but on shared battles and unwavering trust. This tale stirs deep emotions, evoking tears for the unsung heroes among us and the unexpected connections that heal broken lives, urging us to embrace our hidden strengths and trust those who see us for who we truly are. If this story moved you, resonating with moments when you found courage in darkness or built bonds against all odds, share your reflections in the comments below. What act of bravery reshaped your life? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more heart-stirring tales of resilience, love, and redemption. Your support keeps this community thriving, one inspiring story at a time.